What's that can't stop laughing moment where you're in a situation you shouldn't be laughing? Back in 2004, I was at my cousin's funeral, and my aunt was in such a shocked state, she couldn't stop laughing. She was known to do this at funerals. Because laughing is contagious, I also started laughing a little bit, and I had to go to the back of the church and to the bathroom to get it out of me. I was at church for my grandfather's 5th year death anniversary, and the guy singing was so bad my grandma and me were almost died from laughter. I did this at a wedding. They'd hired a terrible violinist for their entrance march, and it just kept getting more screechy and out of tune until finally I just burst out laughing. Not me, but my friend. She was getting fired from her job, and all she could think about was what'll it be, fellas? Mustard or ketchup? From the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. I heard a kid fart in church during a wedding. I had to remove myself because I couldn't get it under control. It was one of those loud, echo of the old wooden pew farts. At a funeral, the pastor kept referring to God as the great comforter, and all I could think of was a tacky bedspread glowing with holy light. Every time he said it, my giggles got worse to the point I had to pretend I was crying really hard and left to hide in the bathroom. My mother and father went to a funeral of one of mother's aunts that she was not close to. In fact, my father had never met her. As they stood at the open casket, my father said to my mother, "She just doesn't look like herself again." My father had never seen the aunt before. For whatever reason, this struck my mother as very funny, and she started laughing. She held her hands to her face and ran from the casket. Her sister saw this and thought she distraught and followed her out to console her, where my mother had to explain that she was laughing and not crying, and why. She was so pissed at my father it was hilarious. I had this really nice but really awkward physics teacher in high school. He was a large nerdy man, but spoke with a lisp and a very soft voice. Imagine the guy from Office Space asking for his stapler. That's how he sounded. One day he is giving his lesson, and mid-sentence he goes from this voice to what sounded like Satan himself. "Okay class, please," deep hell voice, "take out your books." Cough cough, excuse me, must have something in my throat. Then continued like nothing happened. I could not, for the life of me, stop laughing, and I was the only one. It was the most bizarre and hilarious thing I had ever seen. I had to walk out of the class to catch my composure. This was at least 15 years ago now, and I'll never forget it. When I was a second-year law student, I had a classmate abruptly get up mid-lecture and waddled quickly out of the lecture hall. There were about 90 students in the lecture, and in law school, the academic approach is the Socratic method, which is usually the professor and one student going one during the course of a lecture/class. The dude comes back into the classroom, and the professor abruptly halts his current line of questioning with another student. I'm front of the class. The professor asks the returning student, "Is everything okay?" The student responds, "Bad-shippital," and walked back to his seat. I spent the rest of the lecture period giggling through the professor grilling students about family law. TL. Dr. A classmate in law school has an explosive bout with shippital that made him run to the bathroom in the middle of a lecture. In school we did a course on mythology and had a project where we had to write our own mythological stories for the creation of creatures/places/etc. One kid wrote a story about how a man was abusing his horse, so the gods cursed him. One day his horse threw him onto a spear, which went through the back of his head and out of his forehead, and he transformed into the first unicorn. I couldn't stop laughing for a solid 5 minutes. The teacher berated me for laughing at violence, but the kid and I both thought that was funny. Visiting my grandmother's grave with my grandfather for the first time a few years ago. Expected tears and a solemn day. Instead we passed a grave marked Wanda, and my grandfather said, "Well, I wonder what killed her?" None of us could stop laughing. My grandmother would have loved it. There's a scene in The Pianist, which is about the Holocaust, where a woman is shot in the street and her body folds in on itself as she falls to the ground. We watched that movie in sophomore year English class, after reading the book Night by Elie Wiesel. It was completely silent in the classroom during virtually the whole film. But at that part in particular, some kid piped up from the back of the class into the silence with this sad, disappointed tone in his voice, like he just found out the lunch lady was out of chicken nuggets. Oh. She folded. So many of us busted out laughing, and it was completely inappropriate, and I could not help it at all. The teacher was not pleased. My friends from college and I are still super close even 15 years later. There's an inside joke involving giving people a specific fake name that we always laugh about when we get together. Last week one of these friends tried to kill himself. We'll call him John. John's brother, another of the close friends, called me and told me that John had tried to kill himself and that he was at the hospital. Then he tells me that when asked for identification at the scene of the suicide attempt, John gave the paramedics the fake name from college. As sad as I was about what had happened, I bust out laughing so hard when he told me. I couldn't help it. I'm laughing now even thinking about it. All of the other members of the group had the same reaction when John's brother called them. All of them. We've got Lake of Fireside property in hell. Cheers. In high school there was 3 religion courses you could pick. Catholic, Evangelic. On the third day one of the exercises was to talk about death. So there's 20 kids in a circle of chairs and everyone's crying because everyone lost a loved one at some point and death is a hard topic. The teacher starts talking about how she imagines death to be like and begins to tell, I imagine after dying there to be a long spiral staircase. And you go down and down until there's a door, and behind that door. The rest I didn't hear because my friend next to me whispers, a kebab stand. We both sat there giggling for like 20 more minutes until the meeting was over. To this day I feel really bad. This is exactly what I expect to find. With my luck. Can I help you? This is the afterlife. Yup. All the kebab you can eat. Except Tuesdays. Why not Tuesdays? You have to man the stand on Tuesdays. I can think of worse afterlives. My father's funeral. My daughter was 3 months old and had a lot of belly pain. She farted so loudly that the priest needed to stop talking for us to stop laughing. He even told us that the church was a serious place and if we couldn't behave to get out. I told him the deceased was my father and I couldn't control my daughter's farts. My granddad had, if you don't know me by now, played as the curtains closed at his funeral. Shouldn't have laughed. Couldn't help it. Legend. Last year's Thanksgiving. Right before the meal we all stood in a big circle and said a prayer and what we are thankful for. Well, my mom's uncle, I will refer to him as uncle. His name is Dick. Yes, Uncle Dick. When we all stood up, it was revealed that Uncle Dick had forgotten to zip up his jeans after going to the bathroom. My dad and I were directly across from Uncle Dick and we were barely keeping from bursting out in all our laughter. Then he leaned over to me and whispered, I'm thankful that Uncle Dick remembered to put on fresh underwear this morning. About halfway through the meal we were still laughing about it when Grandma came over to yell at us for being distracting. She basically asked what we were laughing at in a not so nice voice. We pointed her gaze across the room and she couldn't help but laugh a bit. We told her it had been like that the whole meal. The way we had the tables set up was a big square of folding banquet tables. So we could look out straight ahead of us at Uncle Dick's boxes. Used to be a member of student council back in college, and this one time during a meeting with the campus dean who was explaining very seriously how some students were shitting on the toilet walls and throwing literal shit on the toilet ceilings which were building up expenses for cleaning. Was asked to give ideas on how to tackle the issue, and I clearly remember trying not to laugh and holding it in perfectly, but then as I made eye contact with a friend of mine in the council we bursted out laughing to the point where our stomachs started to hurt, which led to other members of the council laughing out loud. It was the first time meeting the campus dean as well. After that, anytime I'd see him, he'd give me a dirty look. When I worked with a financial advisor, He misspoke and asked me to check a client's investment in Blackrock instead of BlackRock, an industry fund. He didn't realize what he'd said, and he was super big on maintaining a professional, humorless working environment, so I couldn't point it out. I managed to keep a straight face long enough to excuse myself, then spent 15 minutes wheezing in a spare office. Was sat at dinner with friends this week, and one of the kiddos was saying they had extra stomachs for some particular food. Started talking about how cows had extra stomachs. Then somehow it got to comparing humans and cows, and one of them said in the brightest, most angelic voice, "But mum doesn't have udders." I made the mistake of glancing at her husband, and I swear the filthy twinkle in his eye was audible. Thanks I have long hair. I dropped my head down to look at my plate, so my hair covered my expression, and sat there with my shoulders shaking silently. He asked in a rather amused voice if I was okay as I appeared to be vibrating. Couldn't breathe. On the best date of my life, I went to see A Walk to Remember with my first girlfriend. We were sitting in the 4th to 5th row from the screen, and 2 rows ahead of us were a group of younger girls. One of them is rushing back to her seat with her friends, and she slips and falls. It was a nasty fall too, and even though I felt bad for her, I couldn't stop laughing. It was awful. I don't know why I couldn't stop, and I was even like, God, I know I shouldn't laugh, but that's just making me laugh harder. It took me at least 10 minutes to stop. Girl who fell. If you're out there somewhere, I hope my laughing didn't make you feel bad. To this day I still don't really get why it was so damn funny to me. During a cathedral confirmation liturgy, the bishop let out a resounding fart in the reverberant room as he elevated the host. Immediately, the deacon began swinging the incense pot furibly because the altar boys kneeling directly behind the bishop started holding their noses and waving their hands. My senior year of high school, I went to this memorial breakfast with my principal and a few other seniors because my principal was begging a few of us to go and hey, free breakfast. So getting to the end, this woman starts singing an incredibly moving song, and she's doing beautifully. But I look over at my principal, and he just looks so dead. Like his face was completely blank, and because I also don't deal well with emotion apparently, I thought it was the funniest thing ever. So while this lady is singing and some people are crying, I'm losing my mind, and trying so hard to stop laughing, and I can't. My friends thought I was having a complete mental breakdown, like I'd finally lost my mind or something. I felt absolutely horrible about it, and ducked out as soon as I could. Some older kid at my school ended up in a coma after taking N2O. I think he ended dying, so it's a pretty dark story, and one of the principals came into an assembly and angrily declared nitrous oxide is no laughing matter. I think most of us were too young to know that nitrous oxide is laughing gas, but for some reason I knew, so everyone was silent / scared of the angry teacher, and I was just there trying not to laugh audibly. With a group of friends talking about random speep. After a while the topic of Alzheimer's disease comes up, and a friend comments that his grandmother died of Alzheimer's. Another friend goes, "Didn't know you could die of Alzheimer's. Always thought you died of the complications." And then another friend casually blurts, "Maybe she just forgot she was alive." I had to leave the room because I was crying from laughing. One time in church, a priest giving a sermon on how God is a part of our lives in every way and is always present, etc. It was a deathly quiet service, not the happy singing type. Unfortunately, he chose to end with the words, "Jesus is in the mix." After a few seconds of stifling, I laughed the place down and had to go outside. I still laugh at the idea of Jesus as the DJ of our lives. High school English class, which was first period. A few days before I got in trouble for sleeping and coming in late, my teacher called me a hibernating bear, which I found funny. A few days later we are doing oral book reports and this one kid with a stutter was doing his. The class was being patient with him, but he was struggling along. Then he gets to a point in his book where he talks about a bear, which he stuttered. That reminded me of how just a few days before I was called a bear and how funny I thought that was. So I busted up laughing. I was not laughing at him for stuttering. I was laughing at being reminded of being called a bear. However, I realized that's exactly what it looked like. The entire class gasped at me in horror. I didn't even try to defend myself. But I do promise it was not directed at him. It was at being called a bear myself. Guy on the train in visible pain after an exclamation of "oh god" from inhaling my poisonous gas, and I can't control myself as he's gagging. Even off the train I continued to lose my composure and choke on unexpected laughter. Even years later I still do. When a police officer asked 15-year-old me if I had ordered drugs from somewhere, and I had to grin the whole time despite being innocent. When we moved, we suddenly got a package with some pills and some powder in the mail to my name. Brought it to the police, and it tested positive for whatever it was. So I had to go and get drug tested, and before that I got asked by this really scary looking bald guy with scars on his head if they were in fact mine. And I just started to grin/laugh while denying it. I obviously tested negative and was allowed to go back home. Well, turns out someone at our old home that knew we moved out ordered them to our old empty mailbox, but we had made a thing that everything addressed there gets relocated to the new address, so it landed with us. During sex, my wife farted loudly, and I couldn't finish because I was laughing so hard.